Eskom's financial results for the 6 months until September have seen the utility post a profit for the first time in 4 years. It's managed to earn a net profit of around 9.2 billion rand. It's a 4,000% improvement compared to the same period last year. However, the power utility expects to suffer an over 9 billion rand in losses when the financial year ends in March. Eskom's chief financial officer, that is Calib Cassim. He joins us now via our video link to help us unpack the numbers, so to speak. And Mr. Cassim, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. Of course, the headline-grabbing detail has been around this matter of a 9.2 billion rand profit. It sounds great, but it also doesn't mean that all of Eskom's issues are solved. Mr. Cassim, I think you might be on mute. If you want to just double-check that detail, and hopefully we'll be able to hear you after that. All right, some difficulty there. We'll try to get that sorted out with Mr. Cassim. Certainly an important story, and there we have it. He's back with us again. Great to have you on the program. I would imagine you wouldn't want to be muted at a time where Eskom is finally posting a profit. I hope you caught that question. Should I repeat it?
Yes, I think about the 9.2 billion and what does this mean going forward? Is that it?
Essentially.
Yeah, thanks, Ayanda. Thanks for having me. I think first and foremost, this is the first time in 5 years that Eskom has posted a profit for the 6 months results. But like we announced yesterday, that generally we see the second half of the year where we absorb much more cash than we generate, like we've done in the last financial year, that resulting in a forecasted loss of another 9 billion by year-end. However, these are much better than last year's year-end results of 18.9 billion loss.
Right. I mean, for ordinary South Africans, what should they take from that? I mean, the figures that are being thrown around are quite massive, and I imagine in some respects it goes over people's head. For instance, what are the implications for something like load shedding in the next financial year?
So firstly, for this financial year, we expect that load shedding will contribute to about 0.5% less sales and less revenue. Obviously, the more Eskom can ensure that we meet the demand for the country, other than the economic benefits, it has a top-line benefit for Eskom. The system still is tight, and we're working with generation and the chief operating officer to minimize the impact of load shedding to the economy. But it's still tight. We've always said that Eskom is short of capacity, and until that is added to the grid, I think the next couple of months will remain a challenge.
Yeah. The other major issue around Eskom was around its ballooning debt. A lot of people sometimes who aren't as financially savvy as you are perhaps will hear something like a profit and struggle to reconcile that with how the utility is still battling debt. Are you able to break that down for us?
Yeah, I think, Ayanda, simply put, if you look at your earnings that you generate before interest charges, for the first 6 months, the earnings were sufficient to cover that interest charge. But as we know, with almost 400 billion rand of debt, that interest bill on an annual basis is somewhere around 35 billion rand. And with the second half of the year, when we spend much more on maintenance costs, we do earn less revenue based on two factors. One, lower sales in the summer period, and then we charge lower tariffs. That ultimately results in whatever profit we generate for the year not being enough to cover that 35 billion average interest bill, resulting us posting a loss by year end.
Right.
So as we've always said, that we believe that with Eskom's cash that it's generating, it can't sustain and carry a debt burden that is around 400 billion. We need to find a solution with government to have a more acceptable debt that Eskom then can finance by itself without being reliant on the fiscus.
Speak to us about what that solution looks like, especially in a context where it's not a bailout, which is, I assume, what you're alluding to by relying on the fiscus.
So I think from our perspective, our financial viability will, firstly, whatever sales that we do generate, we want the consumers to pay for it. As you've seen, the municipal arrears that we presented yesterday is sitting at 40.9 billion rand. So addressing that will increase your revenue. That's the first and foremost item. Secondly, the price of electricity. It must not only cover our efficient operating costs, but also our cost of capital. Thirdly, Eskom needs to help itself with its own cost initiatives. We've delivered 7.8 billion against a target of 10 billion for this year, for the 6 months. Year-end target is 20 billion rand. We forecasting 18.5 billion. And then lastly, currently government is supporting us with government injections, and which we are very grateful for. It helped reduce the debt, but there's still that commitment of another 20 billion for average for the next 2 years. If we believe that if all these elements are addressed in combination, that will then allow Eskom to stand on its own feet.
The multiplicity of issues, of course, doesn't end there. Over the last few days, I think it is, there's been a lot of talk around Eskom's ability to meet air quality standards and what that means for its ability to provide power, essentially. That's what it comes down to. Financially, what are the considerations to be made here? I imagine, for one, the power utility can't just shut down some of its plants, even though those plants may not be, meeting those emission standards.
Yeah, I think as Minister Gordon mentioned yesterday in our results, that he's working with Minister Creasy. We believe that we'll work together between the departments to come up with a solution. We have appealed the decision of Department of Environment. That should then allow us to continue to operate while we look to find a solution. At the end of the day, the country can't afford for 16,000 megawatts of supply of electricity not to go to the consumers. The economic implications is a worst case scenario for the country.
What does the solution look like moving forward? In other words, has Eskom even been able to put timelines to when it will get to a stage where it might be compliant when it comes to its emissions standards? It's an incredibly important issue, of course, not only in a country like ours, but globally. This is what the conversation is about. How are power utilities around the world able to keep the lights on whilst being environmentally friendly?
So from an Eskom perspective, our proposed solution is we agreed to decarbonize and to shut down stations 22 gigawatts by 2035. That allows for some of these stations to continue to operate to the end of their natural life. And while we shut down, we're going to definitely look from a just energy transition to repower and repurpose the older stations to ensure that the communities that are reliant on these power stations still have a revenue stream going forward. And in particular, what we want to do is that the cost of that will definitely add megawatts, whereas if you just go on the complete compliance route, one, it'll cost us over 300 billion. Number two, it doesn't add any megawatts to the system. And lastly, from our calculations economically, we will incur that 300 billion and we won't be able to recover it, because by the time you implement it, the current stations would approach the end of their life. So we believe that in balancing the needs of the country, plus Eskom demonstrating that it will bring down emissions through this just energy transition approach, we believe that is a solution that shows that Eskom is committed to the environmental concerns while also balancing the supply of the country.
Very quickly, there's also been a lot of talk, of course, around the unbundling of Eskom. Some time taken to address that yesterday. What are the financial implications looking like so far if we're able to see through this entire process?
So I think first and foremost, the separation is aligned with the DPE roadmap with transmission to go out first. We're looking to sign that asset transfer agreement before the end of December. But at the moment, one would appreciate that if you have not dealt with all the underlying root causes of why we find ourselves in the situation, unbundling in itself is not going to ensure that municipalities pay. It's not going to ensure that the tariffs are at a cost-reflective level. So we need to address the root causes. But what it does allow for, in particular, is it gives that signal to investors that they all have equal access to the transmission grid, that we can attract new investment, and it's independent from that perspective.
Calib Cassim is Eskom's Chief Financial Officer. Great to have you on the program, sir. Thanks very much indeed for your time.